The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Ethan Cole guided his mop across the wooden stage floor, careful not to disturb the handful of people still scattered throughout the community center auditorium. His weathered hands gripped the worn handle, moving in the familiar pattern he'd perfected over years of late nights just like this one. In the front row, Maya sat hunched over her math textbook, her pencil tapping against the page as she concentrated. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at her father, offering a small smile that reminded him so much of her mother it made his heart ache. "No, no, no!" A frustrated voice cut through the quiet. "The sound's completely dead again." The young host of the talent show rehearsal, a college student named Derek, smacked the side of the speaker system. Several teenagers waiting to perform shifted restlessly in their seats while a few parent volunteers huddled near the equipment, suggesting solutions. Ethan kept his head down, continuing his work. He'd learned long ago that being invisible made his job easier. People were more comfortable when the janitor stayed in the background, especially in a small town where his mixed-race background already made some folks uneasy. "We need to test if it's the mic or the speakers," one of the volunteers said, running her hands through her graying hair. "Hey, janitor!" Derek called out, his voice echoing in the half-empty space. "Could you help us out for a second?" Ethan looked up, his mop pausing mid-stroke. "Sir?" A lanky teenager with spiky hair jogged up to the stage, holding out the microphone. "Here," he said with a grin. "Just say something into it, anything. We need to check if it's working." Ethan's throat went dry as he stared at the offered microphone. His palms grew sweaty against the mop handle as memories flooded back, singing in church with Sarah, her gentle encouragement when he'd get shy, the way she'd beam at him from the pew. I don't." He started to decline. "Please, Daddy?" Maya's voice carried from the front row. He turned to see her sitting up straight now. Homework forgotten. Her eyes bright with hope. Something in her expression made him set down his mop. With trembling fingers, he took the microphone, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. The weight of it felt foreign in his hand. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then, almost without conscious thought, he began to hum the opening notes of Amazing Grace, Sarah's favorite hymn, the one she'd asked him to sing to her in those final days at the hospital. His rich baritone filled the auditorium, warm and deep and touched with an ache that spoke of both loss and healing. The sound grew stronger as muscle memory took over, years of singing in church choirs guiding his voice through the familiar melody. The handful of people present fell silent. A teenager who had been scrolling on her phone slowly lowered it, her mouth slightly open. Two parent volunteers stopped their conversation mid-sentence, turning to stare at the stage. Ethan kept his eyes closed, letting the music carry him back to Sunday mornings with Sarah, to quiet evenings singing their baby girl to sleep. His voice swelled with emotion as he reached the verse about grace teaching his heart to fear, and grace his fears relieving. When the last note faded, the silence felt heavy. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and his face flushed hot with embarrassment as he realized what he'd done. He started to hand the microphone back, ready to retreat to his mop and the comfort of invisibility. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite, scattered clapping. It was enthusiastic, genuine appreciation. The teenagers jumped to their feet, whooping and cheering. The parent volunteers were wiping their eyes, still clapping. "Oh my God!" Derek breathed into his own microphone. That was incredible." But Ethan barely heard him. His eyes found Maya in the front row, and the sight of her nearly broke his heart. She stood with her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her cheeks. But her face shone with such pride and joy it almost hurt to look at. "Mr. Cole," one of the parent volunteers called out, "where have you been hiding that voice?" Ethan fumbled with the microphone, nearly dropping it in his haste to hand it back to the nearest person. "The sound system seems to be working fine now," he mumbled, already reaching for his mop. The teenagers crowded closer to the stage, talking over each other. "That was amazing. Are you like a professional singer?" "Do it again, Daddy," Maya whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the excited chatter. They loved it. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped his mop, trying to ground himself in the familiar motion of cleaning. But he couldn't quite hide his smile as his daughter beamed up at him, her homework completely forgotten now. In that moment, she looked so much like Sarah it made his chest tight. the same proud tilt of her chin, the same unwavering belief in him that her mother had always shown. He cleared his throat. "We should let them get back to their rehearsal," he said softly to Maya, already moving to return to his work, to fade back into the background where he felt safe. But something had shifted in the air of the auditorium, something that couldn't be undone. The invisible barrier between the janitor and everyone else had cracked, if only for a moment, and through that crack had poured something beautiful and unexpected. As Ethan resumed his mopping, his daughter's whispered words echoed in his ears. They loved it. And for the first time in years, a small spark of something that felt like possibility flickered in his heart. Sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window of the Coles' modest apartment, catching the steam rising from Maya's bowl of oatmeal. She hadn't touched her breakfast, too busy watching her father sort through a stack of bills at their scratched wooden table. "Daddy, everyone was amazed by your voice last night," Maya said, her spoon clinking against the bowl. "Mrs. Thompson from the library said it gave her goosebumps." Ethan didn't look up from the electric bill he was studying. "That's nice, honey. Don't forget to eat before it gets cold." "The spring benefit concert is coming up next month," Maya continued, her voice rising with excitement. "They're still taking sign-ups for auditions. You could..." "Maya." Ethan's tone was gentle but firm. "We've got more important things to worry about, like getting you new shoes for school." He made a note on their grocery list, his handwriting careful and precise. "But Daddy, finish your breakfast, sweetheart. You'll be late for school." Maya slumped in her chair, stirring her oatmeal without eating it. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between them. That evening, the community center halls were quiet as Ethan pushed his cleaning cart past the practice rooms. The wheels squeaked slightly. He'd been meaning to oil them for weeks. The sound of a piano drifted from one of the rooms, then stopped abruptly as Mrs. Whitfield stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Cole," she called out, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light. "I'm so glad I caught you." Ethan straightened up, automatically adjusting his gray uniform shirt. "Evening, Mrs. Whitfield. I'll get to the choir room next." "This isn't about cleaning." She smiled warmly. "I heard you singing last night. That voice of yours. I haven't heard anything like it in years." Ethan's cheeks grew warm. "Oh, that was nothing. Just helping with the sound check." "Nothing?" Mrs. Whitfield raised an eyebrow. "That hymn you sang, Amazing Grace, it brought tears to my eyes. Such depth, such soul." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "The spring benefit concert needs voices like yours. Real voices, with real feeling." "Ma'am, I appreciate that, but..." Ethan glanced down at his cart, at the mop and cleaning supplies. "I'm just the janitor. People wouldn't want to see." "Daddy!" Maya's voice echoed down the hall as she ran toward them, her backpack bouncing. She was supposed to be waiting in the library while he worked. "Are you talking about the concert?" "Maya, you should be doing your homework," Ethan said. But Mrs. Whitfield was already turning to his daughter with a conspiratorial smile. "Your father has an extraordinary gift," Mrs. Whitfield said, "but he needs some convincing to share it." Maya grabbed Ethan's hand, her eyes pleading. "Mom would want you to sing, Daddy. Remember how she always said your voice made her feel closer to heaven?" Ethan's throat tightened. Sarah had said that, hadn't she? On Sunday mornings when he'd sing while making pancakes, or late at night when she couldn't sleep during her treatments. "I could work with you privately," Mrs. Whitfield offered. "Help you prepare for the audition. No pressure, no audience, just us in the practice room. Please, Daddy?" Maya squeezed his hand. "Just try?" Ethan looked from his daughter's hopeful face to Mrs. Whitfield's kind eyes, then back to his cleaning cart. The weight of his wedding ring seemed heavier on his finger. I suppose I could audition," he said finally, the words coming out slowly. "But I'm not promising anything more than that." Maya threw her arms around his waist, and even Mrs. Whitfield clasped her hands together in delight. "Wonderful," she said. "We'll start tomorrow evening, if that works for you?" Ethan nodded, already wondering if he'd made a mistake. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Ethan stood in their small living room. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting a soft glow on Sarah's photograph on the mantel. She was smiling in the picture, her arms around a younger Maya, her eyes bright and full of life. Ethan picked up the frame, his thumb brushing over the glass. The hymn rose in his throat again, quiet and hesitant in the darkness. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. He hummed softly, as if asking her permission, seeking her approval from wherever she was now. The familiar melody filled the empty room with memories of Sunday mornings, of hospital rooms where hope still lived, of a love that still ached in his chest. He set the photograph back on the mantel, his fingers lingering on the frame. The rest of the hymn remained unsung, hanging in the silence between what was and what could be. Saturday morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of Ethan's small bedroom as he stood before the mirror, fidgeting with his collar. The white button-down shirt had seen better days, but he'd spent an hour last night carefully ironing out every wrinkle. His hands trembled slightly as he attempted to fasten the top button. "Here. Let me help," Maya said, appearing in the doorway. She crossed the room and reached up to straighten his collar, her small fingers working with careful precision. "There. You look perfect." Ethan managed a weak smile. "I don't know about perfect, sweetheart. Stop worrying so much." Maya brushed invisible lint from his shoulders. "Your voice is what matters, and that's already perfect." The walk to the community center felt longer than usual. Maya skipped alongside him, chattering about nothing and everything, while Ethan's stomach churned with each step. As they approached the building where he usually entered through the back service door, he hesitated before following Maya to the main entrance. The lobby was filled with well-dressed performers waiting their turn. Ethan recognized some faces from local theater productions, NPs, people whose floors he'd mopped and whose trash he'd collected. They barely glanced his way, except for a few who did double takes at seeing the janitor in their midst. "Name?" asked a woman with a clipboard, her eyes still on her paper. "Ethan Cole," he said softly. She looked up sharply. "Oh, you're the janitor?" Her tone made him wince. Maya stepped forward. "He's here to audition," she declared proudly. They were directed to wait with the others. Ethan stood awkwardly against the wall, feeling every bit the outsider in his worn dress shirt among the stylish outfits around him. Maya kept hold of his hand, squeezing it whenever his nervousness became visible. Mrs. Whitfield appeared from the auditorium doors, her face lighting up when she spotted them. "Ethan, I'm so glad you came." She hurried over, her silver hair bouncing. "Are you ready? We're running a bit behind schedule, but you'll be up soon." Before Ethan could respond, the auditorium doors opened again. Mr. Harlan strode out, his expensive suit and carefully coiffed hair marking him as someone who belonged in this world of performers and spotlight. His presence seemed to fill the lobby as he surveyed the waiting participants. When his gaze landed on Ethan, his eyebrows rose. "What's this?" he asked, voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space. Mrs. Whitfield stepped forward. "Mr. Harlan, this is Ethan Cole. He's here to audition." "The janitor?" Mr. Harlan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Surely you jest." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. Maya's grip on his hand tightened. "Mr. Cole has an exceptional voice," Mrs. Whitfield insisted. "If you just listen, this is the spring benefit concert, not some charity showcase." "Mr." Harlan cut in. He turned to address the room at large. "We have standards to maintain. The stage is for trained performers, not the help." The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Ethan saw the sideways glances, the poorly hidden smirks, the embarrassed looks away. Each one felt like a physical blow. Maya tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, don't listen to him. Show them what you can do." But Ethan's throat had closed up. The confidence he'd built over the past few days crumbled under the weight of those stares. He was suddenly acutely aware of his shabby shirt, his calloused hands, the gulf between himself and everyone else in this room. "I think we should go," he managed to say. "But Daddy, now." "Maya." His voice was firm but gentle. He began guiding her toward the exit, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mr. Cole," Mrs. Whitfield called after him, but he couldn't bear to turn around. They were halfway down the front steps when Maya pulled on his sleeve again. "Daddy, you belong there," she whispered fiercely. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Ethan's eyes stung as he looked down at his daughter's determined face. She had her mother's fire, that unwavering belief in what was right. But sometimes life wasn't that simple. The walk home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. Maya kept glancing at him, but Ethan couldn't meet her eyes. The afternoon stretched into evening, and they sat at their small kitchen table, the only sound the quiet scrape of forks against plates. Maya pushed her peas around, barely eating. Instead, she began to hum softly, the same hymn he'd sung that first night, the one that had started all this. The familiar melody wrapped around them like a warm embrace, carrying memories of his wife's smile, her unwavering faith in him. Ethan's hands stilled on his fork as the notes filled their tiny kitchen. He knew Maya was trying to reach him, to keep that spark of possibility alive. But right now, all he could feel was the crushing weight of reality, of knowing his place in the world and the doors that would always remain closed to someone like him. Maya continued humming, her small act of defiance against the day's humiliation, while Ethan stared at his plate, his food growing cold, and wondered how he could have ever believed he belonged anywhere but behind a mop. The empty auditorium settled into midnight silence as Ethan finished mopping the last row. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor as he made his way toward the exit. But something made him pause. The stage lights were still on, casting a warm glow that seemed to beckon him. Glancing around the empty space, Ethan slowly walked up the side steps to the stage. His work boots felt heavy against the polished wood. Standing center stage, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of cleaning products and old wood filled his lungs. Without the pressure of watching eyes, Ethan let his voice emerge softly at first. The hymn his wife had loved so much flowed from somewhere deep inside him. As the notes grew stronger, his rich baritone filled every corner of the auditorium. The sound wrapped around him like a warm embrace, and for a moment, he felt closer to Sarah than he had since losing her. In the back row, Mrs. Whitfield sat perfectly still, not daring to make a sound. She pressed her hand to her heart, moved by the raw emotion in Ethan's voice. Even untrained, his natural talent was extraordinary. The next night, Ethan found himself drawn to the stage again. This time, Maya had insisted on staying late with him, curled up in one of the auditorium seats with her math homework spread across her lap. When he started to sing, she pulled out her beaten-up phone and hit record. "Dad," Maya called out after he finished, "that was amazing. Want to hear it?" Ethan grimaced as Maya played back the recording. "Do I really sound like that?" "Even better in person," she giggled. "Try that high note again." He did, and this time his voice cracked spectacularly. They both burst out laughing, the sound of their shared joy bouncing off the walls. Maya's eyes sparkled in a way he hadn't seen since before Sarah got sick. Night after night, they fell into a routine. Ethan would finish his cleaning rounds, and then father and daughter would have their private concert time. Sometimes Maya would join in, her clear young voice harmonizing with his. Other times, she'd just sit and beam at him, recording every moment on her phone. Mrs. Whitfield began meeting them 3 nights a week. She'd slip into the auditorium after her evening choir practice, carrying sheet music and determination. "Stand up straight, Ethan," she'd instruct, pressing gently on his shoulders. "Feel your breath coming from deep in your belly. That's where your power lives." He learned to shape his mouth differently around certain vowels, to support long notes with careful breath control. Mrs. Whitfield was patient but firm, pushing him to extend his range and build his confidence. "Music isn't just about the notes," she told him one evening. "It's about letting people feel what you feel. And you, Ethan Cole, have more feeling in one phrase than most singers have in their whole repertoire." Maya would watch these lessons intently, sometimes mouthing the instructions along with Mrs. Whitfield. During breaks, she'd bring her father water and give him encouraging thumbs-up signs from her usual seat. The hours of practice began to show. Ethan's voice grew stronger, more controlled. He learned to move through difficult passages without hesitation, to let his emotion flow while maintaining technical precision. The hymn that had started it all became something new, not just a memory of Sarah but a celebration of her love. One particularly good session, Ethan had just finished a challenging piece when Maya burst into applause. "Dad, that was perfect. Even better than last night." Mrs. Whitfield nodded in agreement. Your daughter's right, Ethan. You've come so far in just a week. Ethan wiped his forehead with his sleeve and sank into a chair backstage, his body tired but his spirits soaring. For the first time since Sarah's passing, he felt truly alive, like he was doing something that mattered beyond just surviving. Maya bounded over and threw her arms around his neck. Her face glowed with pride as she declared, "You're ready, Dad." Ethan hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. In that moment, backstage in the old community center where he usually spent his nights cleaning, he felt more like himself than he had in years. The janitor's uniform he wore didn't seem to matter anymore, not with his daughter's faith in him and his own voice finally breaking free. The community center's small auditorium buzzed with quiet chatter as 50 townsfolk settled into their seats. Evening light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. In the front row, Maya Cole sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty stage. Mrs. Whitfield touched Ethan's shoulder backstage. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered. "Just breathe and let the music flow." Ethan nodded, tugging at the collar of his freshly pressed blue shirt, the one Sarah had given him for their last anniversary. His hands trembled as he smoothed down his khaki pants for the 10th time. Through the curtain, he could hear Mr. Harlan's distinctive voice carrying from the back row, discussing business with another patron. "And now," announced the young host, "please welcome Ethan Cole, who will perform Remember Me in the Morning Light." The spotlight clicked on, harsh and bright. Ethan's legs felt like lead as he walked to center stage. The microphone stand loomed before him like a silent judge. He gripped it with both hands, his eyes finding Maya's encouraging smile in the front row. "This song," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "is for my wife, Sarah." He closed his eyes, remembering her face, her laugh, the way she used to dance in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. The piano introduction started softly. Ethan's rich baritone emerged, tentative at first, then growing stronger with each note. The ballad spoke of love that transcended loss, of memories that lived in morning light and evening shadows. His voice carried years of unspoken grief and enduring love, touching something universal in every heart present. In the second verse, about morning coffee and empty chairs, an elderly woman in the third row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. A young mother 2 rows behind her reached for her husband's hand. The words about teaching their daughter to ride a bike brought a sob from somewhere in the middle section. Maya watched her father transform on stage. Gone was the hesitant janitor who faded into the background. In his place stood a man sharing his soul through song, his voice rich with emotion yet perfectly controlled, just as Mrs. Whitfield had taught him. Tears streamed down Maya's cheeks, but she couldn't wipe them away. Her hands were still clasped together, holding her father up with all her might. As Ethan reached the bridge, his voice soared to new heights. "Remember me in the morning light, when dawn breaks golden and new. Remember me in our daughter's eyes, for that's where I'll be watching you." The raw honesty in his delivery made the lyrics pierce straight to the heart. Even Mr. Harlan, who had been checking his phone at the start, now sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the dimness of the back row. His hand had stilled mid-motion, his usual air of superiority temporarily forgotten. The final notes faded into perfect silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then, Maya leaped to her feet, applauding with all her strength. Like a wave, the audience followed, rising row by row until everyone stood. The applause thundered through the small space, accompanied by calls of "bravo" and sniffles from those still wiping away tears. Mrs. Whitfield beamed from the wings, her own eyes glistening. Veterans who usually sat stoically through performances were standing tall, clapping with vigor. A group of immigrant families who attended ESL classes at the center were smiling and nodding, emotion transcending any language barrier. In the back, Mr. Harlan's hands came together in slow, reluctant claps. His face struggled between maintaining his usual disdain and acknowledging the undeniable impact of Ethan's performance. Ethan stood in the spotlight, overwhelmed by the response. A smile broke through his nervousness. Not the self-conscious half-smile he usually wore, but a full, genuine expression of joy that made him look years younger. He managed a small bow, just as Mrs. Whitfield had coached him. The applause continued as he left the stage on shaking legs. Maya met him at the steps, throwing her arms around his waist. "Daddy, you were amazing!" she exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. Later that night, in their modest living room, Maya couldn't contain her excitement. She sat cross-legged on their worn couch, replaying the video she'd recorded on her phone for the third time. The small screen couldn't capture the full power of the performance, but Ethan's voice still filled their living room with warmth. "Look at everyone standing up," Maya pointed at the screen. Even grumpy Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store was crying. Ethan sat beside her, finally relaxed in his old t-shirt and jeans. The triumph of the evening had left a quiet glow in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something like pride, something like possibility. He watched himself on the tiny screen, barely recognizing the confident figure bathed in spotlight. Maya snuggled closer to his side, still clutching her phone like a treasure. "Maybe," Ethan said softly, allowing himself a small smile. "Maybe we really can do this." The plain white envelope sat unopened on Ethan's kitchen counter for hours after he got home from work. The community center's logo gleamed in the corner, promising either dreams or disappointment. Maya had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. With tired fingers, Ethan finally tore open the envelope and unfolded the spring benefit concert schedule. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, 3 times. A cold weight settled in his stomach. His name wasn't there. He checked the back of the page. Nothing. Just a list of proper society names, arranged in neat rows, none of them Cole. The paper trembled in his hands. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the community center early. Before his shift, the morning sun cast long shadows through the lobby windows as he approached the administration office. Mrs. Whitfield was already there, her face drawn with concern. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said before he could speak. Mr. Harlan made some calls, the committee felt. She twisted her hands together. They felt it would be better to stick with more traditional performers. Traditional? Ethan's voice came out rough. "I fought for you, I promise." Mrs. Whitfield's eyes were red-rimmed. "But Mr. Harlan has significant influence. He threatened to withdraw his sponsorship." As Ethan walked through the hallways to begin his shift, he caught snippets of whispered conversations that fell silent as he passed. "The janitor, embarrassing the town, knows his place now." Each word felt like a physical blow. Ethan gripped his mop handle tighter, keeping his eyes down as he worked. The stage he'd stood on just days ago now felt a million miles away. That evening, Maya bounced into the kitchen, humming the tune he'd performed at the showcase. She pulled out her math homework while Ethan stirred a pot of mac and cheese, her favorite comfort food. He couldn't put this off any longer. "Maya, honey." He set 2 bowls on the table. "We need to talk about the concert." She looked up, her smile fading at his tone. "What's wrong?" Ethan's throat felt tight. "I won't be performing in it after all." "What?" Maya's pencil clattered to the floor. "But you were amazing at the showcase. Everyone loved you." "Not everyone, sweetheart." He sat heavily in his chair. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we hope." "It's Mr. Harlan, isn't it?" Maya's voice rose. "He can't do this. It's not fair." "Maya." "No." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You can't let them win. You can't give up." "I'm not giving up." Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm protecting you. I don't want you getting hurt because of me. I don't want kids at school making fun of you because your dad's just the janitor who thought he could be something more. I don't care what they say." Maya pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the linoleum. "Mom would want you to keep singing. She would." "Maya." His voice cracked. "Please." She stared at him for a long moment, then ran from the kitchen. Her bedroom door slammed moments later. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, the mac and cheese growing cold in their bowls. Through the thin walls, he could hear Maya's muffled sobs. Hours later, after Maya had cried herself to sleep, Ethan sat in the darkness of their small living room. The borrowed microphone from Mrs. Whitfield stood in its stand in the corner, a silent reminder of dreams too big for a man like him. He remembered the way Maya's eyes had shone with pride during his showcase performance. The way the audience had stood and cheered. For a brief, shining moment, He'd felt like more than just the man who cleaned up after everyone else. But now, in the quiet darkness, reality pressed in around him. He was Ethan Cole, widowed janitor. Nothing more. The microphone stood like a shadow of what could have been, and the weight of letting Maya down settled heavy on his shoulders. He sat there for a long time, listening to the tick of the wall clock and the soft whir of passing cars, feeling smaller with each passing moment. The empty space where his music should have been echoed with silence. Maya sat in the school computer lab during her lunch break, her sandwich forgotten beside the keyboard. Her fingers flew across the keys as she designed a simple flyer. The words, "Let Ethan Cole sing the voice that brings hope," took shape in bold letters across the top. She glanced around to make sure no teachers were watching, then hit print. The ancient printer wheezed to life, spitting out 20 copies in smudged black ink. Maya quickly stuffed them into her backpack just as the bell rang. After school, she started with Mrs. Johnson's corner store, where her dad always helped carry in heavy deliveries without being asked. "Of course I'll sign, dear Mrs. Johnson said, her weathered hand steady as she wrote her name. "Your father's got more kindness in his little finger than most folks have in their whole body." At the Veterans Center where Ethan volunteered on weekends, old Mr. Martinez didn't even need to read the petition. "That man cleaned my wife's wheelchair for free when it got stuck in the mud," he said, signing with a flourish. "And he sang Amazing Grace at her funeral last year. Never charged a penny." The signatures multiplied. Maya stood outside the grocery store where immigrant families shopped, explaining in her broken Spanish how her father had helped many of them fill out school forms for their children. They signed eagerly, adding encouraging messages in multiple languages. At church on Sunday, Maya set up a small table in the fellowship hall. The senior citizens group surrounded her, sharing stories about how Ethan had changed light bulbs in their homes, cleared their walkways of snow, or simply stopped to chat when they were lonely. "That man's got heaven in his voice," old Mrs. Peters declared, taking the petition around to all her friends. And not an ounce of pride about it. Single mothers from the apartment complex where they lived added their names, recalling times Ethan had fixed their cars or watched their children in emergencies. "He never made us feel like we were asking for charity," one young mother said, bouncing a baby on her hip as she signed. The petition grew thick with pages. Maya's backpack bulged with signatures and letters of support. Even some of the wealthy family's teenage children, who had heard Ethan sing at the showcase, signed in defiance of their parents' disapproval. 1 week after she began, Maya marched into City Hall, her arms full of papers. The mayor's secretary tried to turn her away, but Maya stood her ground. "Please," she said firmly. "These are from real people. People who matter." The mayor, a practical woman with gray hair and reading glasses, agreed to see her. As she flipped through the hundreds of signatures and testimonials, her expression softened. "Your father has touched a lot of lives," she said finally, looking at Maya over her glasses. "Sometimes the quiet ones make the biggest difference." That afternoon, the mayor called an emergency meeting of the Spring Benefit Concert Committee. Mr. Harland arrived in an expensive suit, ready to defend his position. But when faced with the stack of petitions and the mayor's stern gaze, his arguments fell flat. "This concert is about community," the mayor declared, "and these signatures show who the community really supports." She turned to Mrs. Whitfield. "Put Mr. Cole back on the program." As the closing act, Mr. Harland's face turned red. "But, unless you'd like the local papers to run a story about how one wealthy sponsor tried to silence the people's choice," the mayor asked mildly. Mr. Harland sat down, silent. Maya ran all the way home from school the next day, the official reinstatement letter clutched in her hand along with the thick petition. She burst through their apartment door, out of breath and beaming. "Daddy, Daddy, look!" Ethan was at the kitchen table, still in his work uniform, looking tired. His eyes widened as Maya spread the papers in front of him. "What is all this?" he asked softly. "It's everyone who believes in you," Maya said, watching as her father's hands trembled while picking up the petition. "All the people you've helped, they want you to sing." Ethan's eyes grew wet as he read name after name, message after message. His fingers traced the familiar signatures, the shaky writing of elderly neighbors, the careful letters of ESL students, the bold strokes of veterans. "Maya, his voice caught. "I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Maya replied, hugging him tight. Just sing, that's all they want. Ethan held the papers close to his chest, overwhelmed by the weight of so much faith, so much support. The responsibility felt enormous, but for the first time, it also felt right. Look, Maya said, pointing to the official letter. You're the closing act. They saved the best for last. Ethan's hands shook as he read the letter. His expression showed a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and nervous anticipation. He pulled Maya close, kissing the top of her head. We did it, Daddy, she whispered. Or really, you did it. By being you. The evening lights of the spring benefit concert cast a warm glow through the community center's windows. Backstage, Ethan Cole paced in tight circles, his borrowed dress shoes clicking against the wooden floor. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, and he kept tugging at the navy blue tie Maya had helped him pick out. The sounds of the audience filing in drifted through the curtain. Whispers, laughter, the rustle of programs, and the scraping of chairs. Each noise made Ethan's heart beat faster. He'd cleaned this stage 1,000 times, but standing on it as the closing act felt like stepping onto another planet. Mrs. Whitfield appeared, clipboard in hand. 5 minutes, Ethan. Her kind eyes crinkled with encouragement. Just remember to breathe like we practiced. Maya, who had been watching her father's nervous pacing, stepped forward and took his trembling hand in both of hers. Even in his dress shoes, Ethan towered over his 12-year-old daughter. But at that moment, her quiet strength made her seem so much bigger. They're waiting for you, Daddy, she whispered, squeezing his fingers. Just like Mom would be. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded, unable to speak. The memory of his wife, of how she'd always believed in his voice, wrapped around his heart like a warm blanket. The current act finished, and polite applause filtered through the curtain. Mrs. Whitfield touched Ethan's shoulder. It's time. Maya gave him one final hug, then scurried out to take her seat in the front row. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit him like a physical force. Through its glare, he could make out hundreds of faces. Familiar ones from his years of quiet service, strangers drawn by the controversy, and right in the middle of the front row, Maya's beaming face. The audience erupted in cheers and applause before he'd even reached the microphone. Ethan saw veterans he'd helped carry groceries, immigrant families whose children he'd entertained while mopping the floors, and elderly residents who'd always stopped to chat during his shifts. They were all standing, clapping, showing him they believed. His hand still trembled as he adjusted the microphone. The opening notes of the piano filled the hall, the same hymn his wife had loved, the one that had started this whole journey when he'd hummed it that night on stage. Ethan's first note wavered slightly, colored by nervousness. But as the familiar melody wrapped around him, something shifted. He thought of his wife's smile, of Maya's unwavering faith, of all the people who had signed that petition believing in a janitor's right to share his gift. His voice grew stronger, fuller, rising into the rafters with a richness that seemed to stop time itself. The hymn spoke of hope after loss, of light breaking through darkness, of healing and second chances. Ethan poured every moment of grief, every spark of joy, every ounce of love for his daughter into each note. People in the audience began to reach for each other's hands. Tears streamed down faces. An elderly woman in the third row closed her eyes, swaying gently. A group of teenagers who usually hung out making trouble after school sat completely still, transfixed. In the back of the hall, Mr. Harlan stood rigid, his usual proud posture slowly melting. As Ethan's voice swelled into the bridge of the song, the businessman's head bowed, his shoulders dropping in silent acknowledgement of the truth and beauty that transcended social status. The final verse rose like a prayer, Ethan's voice carrying all the pain and triumph of his journey. When he hit the last note, pure and strong, the silence that followed felt holy. Then Maya leapt to her feet, tears streaming down her face, starting a wave of motion as the entire audience rose. The standing ovation crashed through the hall like thunder, the walls themselves seeming to shake with its force. Flowers appeared from somewhere, sailing onto the stage. Ethan stood there, tears in his own eyes, looking down at his daughter's radiant face. In that moment, he wasn't a janitor or a widower or an outsider. He was simply a father sharing his gift, a man reclaiming his dignity, a voice helping others heal. The applause continued. washing over him in waves. Maya's smile shone brighter than any spotlight, and in it, Ethan saw all the pride and love that had carried them to this moment. The heavy doors of the community center swung open with a soft whoosh as Ethan and Maya stepped out into the crisp spring evening. Stars twinkled above them like scattered diamonds across a deep velvet sky, and a gentle breeze carried the last echoes of applause from inside the building. The air smelled of freshly bloomed lilacs from the nearby bushes, mixing with the lingering scent of coffee and cookies from the reception. Ethan's chest still felt warm from the standing ovation, though his hands trembled slightly. This time from joy rather than nervousness. His worn dress shirt, the same one he'd pressed so carefully that morning, now felt different somehow, as if it had absorbed the evening's magic. "Mr. Cole! Mr. Cole!" Several voices called out as people spilled onto the concrete steps behind them, their footsteps creating a gentle symphony on the weathered stone. A cluster of townsfolk surrounded them, their faces bright with emotion and transformed by what they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Johnson, who worked the early shift at the grocery store and had bags under her eyes from too many double shifts, wiped tears from her cheeks as she gripped his hand with both of hers. Her work-worn fingers felt warm against his palm. "Your voice. It reminded me of my daddy's old church choir back in Alabama," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I haven't felt that kind of peace in years, honey. Not since Mama passed." She shook her head slowly, as if still trying to process what had happened inside. "You took me right back to Sunday mornings when I was little, sitting in those wooden pews with the windows open and the gospel floating out over the cotton fields." Maya beamed up at her father, squeezing his other hand tight. She watched with wonder as person after person approached him, each sharing how his song had touched them in ways they struggled to put into words. Her heart swelled with pride as she saw the way her father listened to each person, truly listened, nodding and responding to their stories as if each one was the most important thing he'd ever heard. Mr. Rodriguez, the veteran who always nodded hello during Ethan's late-night cleaning rounds at the community center, pushed through the small crowd. His weathered face, usually stoic and guarded, now showed traces of the young soldier he'd once been. He clasped Ethan's shoulder firmly with a hand that had seen too much but still knew how to offer comfort. "You gave us all courage tonight, friend." "Real courage," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Haven't felt anything like that since. Well, since before I came back from overseas. Made me remember what I was fighting for over there." He paused, looking down at his shoes for a moment before meeting Ethan's eyes again. "Thank you for reminding me that beautiful things still exist in this world." Even some of the wealthy patrons who'd previously ignored him now stepped forward with genuine smiles, their designer jewelry catching the streetlight as they moved. Their expensive clothes and carefully styled hair seemed less important somehow, their faces softened by the lingering effect of his performance. Mrs. Patterson, who usually looked through Ethan as if he were invisible when she saw him mopping floors, now approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "I never really saw you before tonight, but your voice, it opened something in my heart that I thought was closed forever." Mrs. Whitfield made her way through the crowd, her usual practical sweater traded for an elegant blue dress that matched the evening's special occasion. The dress brought out the kindness in her eyes, making her look younger despite her silver hair. She moved with the confidence of someone who had always believed this moment would come, even when others doubted. "Ethan," she said warmly, taking both his hands in hers, her grip steady and reassuring. "You've started something beautiful here tonight, something that goes far beyond one song or one performance." She glanced around at the faces surrounding them, all united in their appreciation of music's simple but profound power. "There will be opportunities. The church choir has already asked me to invite you, and I know the regional gospel festival would love to hear you, maybe even beyond our little town, if you're willing." Ethan smiled, ducking his head slightly in that humble way. Maya knew so well, the gesture that always made her heart ache with love for this gentle man who never fully understood his own worth. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself," he said, his voice still carrying traces of the emotion from his performance. "For seeing something I couldn't see." He looked around at the gathered faces, taking in each one. The grocery store clerk still wiping tears, the veteran standing straighter than he had in years, the wealthy woman learning to see beyond her own world, all united in their appreciation of music's simple power to break down walls and build bridges. "But you know what matters most to me?" Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "Tonight I saw people holding hands who've never spoken to each other before. I saw tears in eyes that are usually hard. I saw smiles on faces that forgot how. Music. It brought us together in a way that nothing else could." The crowd murmured in agreement, heads nodding as people began to notice the connections forming around them. Strangers were still talking to each other, making plans to meet for coffee, exchanging phone numbers. The artificial barriers that had separated them for so long seemed to be crumbling like old walls finally giving way to spring growth. Maya noticed Mr. Harland hovering at the edge of the group, partially hidden in the shadow of a large oak tree. The usual stern lines of his face had softened, and he looked somehow smaller, more human than she'd ever seen him. His expensive suit seemed less imposing now, and she could see uncertainty in his posture. When he caught Ethan's eye across the crowd, he gave a slight nod. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that spoke volumes about the change happening in his heart. As the crowd began to disperse, people still calling out their thanks and promises to be in touch, father and daughter started their walk home. The streetlights cast long dancing shadows on the cracked sidewalk, and the spring air held just enough chill to make them walk close together. Maya's heart felt so full it might burst, like a balloon stretched to its limit with pure happiness. The familiar route home looked different tonight, as if someone had painted everything with softer colors and brighter light. They passed Mrs. Chen's flower shop, where tulips and daffodils pressed against the window glass like they were trying to escape and join the celebration. The old Methodist church stood proud on the corner, its steeple reaching toward the star-filled sky, and Maya imagined her father's voice filling that sacred space with the same magic it had created tonight. "Daddy," she said softly, swinging their joined hands in a gentle rhythm that matched their footsteps. "When you sing, you change hearts. I saw it happen tonight. Everyone did." She looked up at him, her young face serious with the weight of truth. "You don't just make pretty sounds. You make people remember who they really are inside." Ethan stopped walking for a moment, turning to look at his daughter under the warm glow of a streetlight. The light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, making it shimmer like frost, and his eyes shimmered with unshed tears that reflected the stars above. He bent down and kissed her forehead, lingering there as if drawing strength from her unwavering faith in him, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the innocence that still clung to her despite all the grown-up wisdom she carried. "You changed my heart first, baby girl," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "You never let me give up. Even when I wanted to disappear, you kept believing I had something worth sharing." They walked on, passing the familiar landmarks of their neighborhood that had witnessed their struggles and would now witness their triumph. The corner store where Maya bought her school supplies with carefully counted coins, the park where she used to play on the rusty swings while Ethan watched from a weathered bench, notepad in hand, secretly writing lyrics he never thought he'd share with the world. Everything looked different tonight, touched by new possibility and the warm glow of dreams finally given permission to grow. The old playground equipment seemed less lonely now, the empty swings moving gently in the breeze like they were keeping time with a song only they could hear. Even the cracked basketball court where teenagers sometimes gathered looked more welcoming, as if the music had somehow softened all the hard edges of their world. When they reached their small house with its peeling paint and crooked front steps, Ethan fumbled with the keys, his fingers still tingling from the evening's excitement and the memory of strangers' grateful handshakes. The porch light cast a warm, golden glow on their faces as they stepped inside, and the familiar scent of home, a mixture of coffee, Maya's art supplies, and the lavender soap his wife had loved, wrapped around them like a welcoming embrace. The house felt different too, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the magic of the evening. No longer a place where dreams were carefully folded away and hidden in dark corners, but where they could grow and flourish in the light. The living room, with its second-hand furniture and Maya's artwork covering the refrigerator, now felt like a palace filled with infinite possibility. Maya hugged her father tightly before heading to her room, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with the faint aroma of the community center's old wood floors. "Good night, Daddy. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Love you too, sweetheart," Ethan replied, his voice soft with contentment as he watched her disappear down the narrow hallway, her footsteps light and happy on the worn carpet. Alone in the living room, Ethan picked up the framed photo of his wife from the mantel, his fingers tracing the familiar outline of her face through the glass. Her smile seemed brighter tonight, more present, as if she too had been in that audience, clapping and crying with joy. The photo had sat in the same spot for years, a bittersweet reminder of loss. But tonight it felt like a celebration of love that transcended even death. He began to hum their hymn, the same one that had started everything that night at the community center when fear and doubt had nearly silenced him forever. But this time the melody carried no weight of grief or regret. Instead, it floated up like a prayer of gratitude, filling the house with joy and hope, wrapping around the furniture and settling into the corners like a blessing that would linger long after the song ended. From her bedroom, Maya listened to her father's humming, a smile spreading across her face as she drifted toward sleep. The sound wrapped around her like the softest blanket, warm with promise and peace, and the certainty that tomorrow would bring new adventures for the man whose voice could change the world. Through her window, the stars continued their quiet dance, eternal witnesses to a night when music had done what it did best: heal hearts, build bridges, and light the way forward into a future bright with possibility. Golden sunlight streamed through the elaborate stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting intricate rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews and worn burgundy carpet. Ethan Cole sat beside Maya in their usual spot, 5 rows from the back, near the window where the morning light fell just right, but something felt profoundly different this morning. The familiar sanctuary seemed transformed, alive with a warm, electric energy he'd never experienced before. The very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. Mrs. Peterson, who worked the morning shift at Miller's grocery store and always wore her silver hair in a neat bun, stopped in the aisle to squeeze his shoulder with surprising gentleness. Her weathered hands, marked by years of handling produce and counting change, lingered there for a moment. "That concert last night, Ethan. I haven't cried like that in years. You touched something deep in all of us." Her pale blue eyes crinkled with genuine warmth, the kind of expression he'd seen her reserve for her own grandchildren. "Thank you, ma'am," Ethan replied softly, his voice still carrying a trace of disbelief. He was still unused to such direct attention, such open acknowledgement of his worth. Maya beamed beside him, her small frame practically vibrating with pride as she smoothed down her Sunday dress, the navy blue one with tiny white flowers that she'd insisted on wearing despite it being slightly too small. She sat up straighter in the pew, her chin lifted with the quiet confidence of a daughter who had always known her father was special. More church members paused in the aisle to offer congratulations, creating a gentle traffic jam of well-wishers that would have embarrassed Ethan just days ago. Old Mr. Thompson, a Korean War veteran with silver stubble and kind brown eyes who always sat alone in the corner pew, made his way over with deliberate steps. His weathered hand clasped Ethan's firmly, the grip still strong despite his 83 years. "Son," he said, his gravelly voice thick with emotion. "You did us all proud up there. Made me remember why I fight to get up every Sunday morning." For the first time in years, perhaps since Rebecca's funeral, Ethan didn't feel the familiar urge to shrink into the shadows or duck his head in embarrassment. He sat tall, his shoulders straight and proud. Maya's small, warm hand nestled securely in his larger one, as the morning light wrapped around them both like a golden embrace. The whispered conversations and gentle smiles seemed to create a protective cocoon around their little family of 2. Pastor Richard stepped up to the carved wooden pulpit, his kind face surveying the congregation with obvious satisfaction. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and his warm brown eyes held the satisfied glow of a shepherd who had watched his flock grow closer together. "What a blessed weekend we've had," he began, his rich voice carrying easily through the sanctuary, smiling directly at Ethan with paternal pride. "Our community has shown the world what happens when we open our hearts to each other's gifts, when we look past the surface to see the souls God has placed among us." Ethan noticed Mr. Harlan slip quietly into the back row, his usual confident bearing notably muted. The businessman's expensive suit still fit perfectly, but something in his posture had shifted the rigid pride, replaced by something softer, more thoughtful. Their eyes met briefly across the sanctuary before the businessman looked away, and Ethan sensed something like understanding, maybe even regret, passing between them in that moment. The service proceeded with its familiar rhythm prayers that felt more heartfelt than usual, scripture readings that seemed to carry extra weight, and hymns that filled the sanctuary with rich, layered harmony. The congregation sang with unusual enthusiasm, their voices blending in ways that made the old walls seem to resonate with joy. But when Mrs. Whitfield rose from the piano bench for the final hymn, she paused, her elegant fingers hovering over the keys. "This morning," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the sanctuary, her usual warm smile brightened by genuine excitement, "I'd like to invite Ethan Cole to lead us in our closing hymn, Amazing Grace." A ripple of excited murmurs swept through the congregation like wind through wheat. Heads turned, smiles spread, and Ethan's heart jumped straight into his throat, pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He hadn't expected this invitation. Singing at the concert had been one thing, a single moment of courage. But here, in this sacred space where he'd sat quietly for so many years, Maya squeezed his hand with both of hers and leaned close to whisper, "Go on, Daddy. Just like we practiced in the car. Remember? Your voice belongs everywhere." Drawing a deep, steadying breath that carried the scent of old wood and furniture polish, Ethan stood on legs that felt suddenly wobbly. His legs trembled slightly as he made his way down the familiar aisle, past faces he'd known for years but had never dared to truly engage. But with each step on the worn carpet runner, he remembered the strength he'd discovered on that concert stage just hours before, the power that lived in his voice and in his story. Mrs. Whitfield nodded encouragingly from her position at the upright piano, her fingers already finding the opening chords. As Ethan turned to face the congregation, he saw not judgment or surprise, but expectation, the good kind, the kind that believed in him completely. The familiar piano introduction began, its gentle melody filling the sanctuary with anticipation, and Ethan closed his eyes, centering himself the way Mrs. Whitfield had taught him. When he opened his mouth to sing, his voice emerged clear and strong, carrying years of faith and struggle. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The hymn carried all the accumulated weight of his journey, the devastating loss of his beloved wife, the years of quiet struggle to raise Maya alone, the recent triumph of being truly seen and accepted for who he was. His rich baritone filled every corner of the sanctuary, bouncing off the high ceiling and settling into hearts, carrying not just melody but living testimony of God's faithfulness. That saved a wretch like me. One by one, like candles being lit in darkness, the congregation joined in. Ethan heard Maya's clear young voice rising beside him. Mrs. Whitfield's trained soprano, adding elegant harmonies, the rough but heartfelt bass of Mr. Thompson. Even Mr. Harlan's hesitant tenor, uncertain at first but growing stronger, blended into the growing harmony that filled the sacred space. I once was lost, but now am found. The voices swelled together, lifting toward the painted rafters like incense, like prayers made audible. Elderly Mrs. Jackson dabbed at her weathered cheeks with a lace handkerchief, her voice wavering with emotion. A young mother in the third row held her sleeping baby closer, swaying gently to the rhythm while tears streamed down her face. The morning sun seemed to brighten through the stained glass, as if heaven itself was leaning in to listen to their united song of redemption. Was blind, but now I see. As they moved into the final verse, Ethan felt something profound shift in the room, a healing, a coming together that went deeper than mere music. The invisible walls that had once divided them by status, by circumstance, by unspoken prejudices, seemed to dissolve completely in the shared melody. He wasn't just the janitor anymore, and they weren't just faces he cleaned up after in empty buildings. They were one voice, one community, one family bound together by something larger than any individual story. When the last note faded into reverent silence, a peaceful quiet held the room like a blessing. Mr. Harlan's head remained bowed, his shoulders no longer rigid with pride but relaxed in what looked like genuine reflection, maybe even prayer. Pastor Richard stepped forward with misty eyes and a voice thick with emotion to offer the benediction, his words of blessing feeling more meaningful than usual. After the service ended and the final amen had been spoken, Ethan and Maya walked slowly out into the late morning sunshine. The spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming dogwoods and fresh-cut grass, and Maya skipped ahead of him down the sidewalk, her patent leather shoes clicking a happy rhythm on the sun-warmed concrete. Her navy dress swirled around her knees as she moved, and her face glowed with the kind of pure joy that only children could express so completely. She began to hum softly, almost unconsciously. The melody of the hymn her mother had loved so much, the same gentle tune Ethan had sung that first night at the community center when everything had changed. The sweet sound drifted back to him like a precious gift, like Rebecca's own voice carried on the spring breeze. Without thinking, without any hesitation or self-consciousness, Ethan joined in, his deeper voice creating a natural harmony with Maya's lighter tune. Their combined song floated across the quiet Sunday street, past the blooming gardens and white picket fences, past the neighbors sitting on their front porches who smiled and waved as the music reached them. The melody seemed to carry all their hopes and dreams, all their love for each other and for the woman who had brought them together. Together they walked toward home, their voices weaving together in the warm morning air like threads in a tapestry, carrying forward the love that had started it all, the faith that had sustained them through the darkest times. As they turned onto their familiar street lined with maple trees just beginning to leaf out, the hymn ended naturally, but the warmth it created lingered between them like a blessing, like a promise of good things yet to come. Maya reached for his hand with the easy trust of a daughter who had never doubted her father's worth, and Ethan held it tight, his heart overflowing with gratitude for this remarkable child who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. They walked the rest of the way home in peaceful, contented silence, their footsteps falling into perfect rhythm on the sidewalk, their hearts finally, truly at home in their own skin, in their own story, in their own beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life. If this story touched your heart even just a little, take a moment. Breathe it in, because sometimes the most powerful symphonies are born from silence, and the most extraordinary lives begin with the courage to start again. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of the single dad and his daughter's journey finding a voice on a stage he used to clean resonated with you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your words inspire more than you know. If you believe in stories that heal, uplift, and remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Your time, your presence, your kindness, they mean the world. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop listening.